Madam President, first of all, we would like to thank the United Kingdom for their presidency in February and to wish every success to the American presidency in the month of March. Madam First Lady, we welcome your personal participation in the meeting today. We're grateful to you for convening this meeting on a very important topic, the topic of children, technology, and education in conflict. The access of children to education is one of the main rights enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. More than that, it's an imperative for humankind if humankind wants to follow the path of progress. Education is what is called upon to make a little person heir to countless scientific, spiritual, moral, and ethical riches accumulated by humankind. It's not just aggregated knowledge, which in this day and age is accessible online and is subject to artificial intelligence. Education is called upon to develop an ethical sense in a person and its creativity. In other words, receive the main things which distinguish a human being from animals and from increasingly capable robots. Armed conflict is the enemy of education in all senses of the word. Children, against their will, when they're in conflict, end up being cut off from schools, from their teachers, from their peers. They end up in a situation where they're isolated and are under constant stress. We also need to recall here that there are wars which are conducted for inter alia, the purpose of depriving children of education, and my country has first-hand knowledge of such situations. Hitler, for example, used to say, and I quote, "When it comes to the issue of how to handle the Russians, for us, the principal line is there and it's perfectly clear. These people are not to be provided with culture. It's quite enough to have children remember at school remember road signs, to learn the multiplication tables, and to learn how to sign their name." End of quote. And that is precisely why our country will never forget the horrors of Nazism, will not allow it to be reborn, and deprive the world of Russian culture and culture in general. Madam President, today what we need to do is to make every effort to make sure that during armed conflict, children's education remain guaranteed to the extent that it's possible. The absence of access to education makes children even more vulnerable to violence and recruitment by armed groups. Technology and innovation do have a serious potential as a tool to improve children's lot in armed conflict. When educational institutions close down because of armed hostilities, remote education technologies do come into play, but they cannot replace a fully fledged education. It's important to remember here that in developing countries impacted by conflict, very frequently have no necessary infrastructure or the possibility to create such an infrastructure, and the digital coverage for the population could be very low. And that is why they need to be assisted in overcoming the digital divide. We also should remember that the online environment is where extremist ideologies are being disseminated. Children without education become easy prey for extremists and terrorists. And if we do not find a possibility to provide a decent specialized education to our children, well, they will become so-called educated by other, much more dangerous sources. Internet is also the place where materials are being disseminated depicting sexual violence against children and scenes of their sexual exploitation. Combating these monstrous developments is something that is enshrined in a number of provisions of the UN Convention Against Cybercrime. It's a first in history universal treaty in this area, and this document was developed upon Russia's initiative. The malefactors use new technologies, including artificial intelligence, also to organize campaigns of disinformation and conducting computer attacks, which hit inter alia national educational systems and their students. We are convinced that the key to success in countering these threats consists in the following. We have to make sure that the digital solution developers abide by national laws of those states where they operate, and that countries cooperate amongst themselves on this issue without politicizing it. Madam President, even though there are opportunities provided by technologies, nothing can replace personal interaction with a teacher as well as contact with other children. Therefore, even during an armed conflict, schools must remain a safe space. They must not be used for military purposes or be attacked. Madam President, we must note that sometimes protecting children in an armed conflict becomes an instrument of political manipulations, where in an unacceptable manner the labels of wrongdoer is placed on one, whereas the crimes of others are being passed over in silence. For example, very few know, or rather don't want to know, that last week alone, Russian schools were targeted by the armed forces of Ukraine 5 times. Or that in Belgorod Oblast last year, children had to study remotely, or do they know that the Russian students in a number of regions now have mandatory training on safety procedures in the case of artillery shelling, drone attack, hostage taking, evacuation, or first aid? Nor do they recall that the children of Donbass have been growing up under Ukrainian armed forces shelling since 2014 and grew up that way, and hundreds of children died and were maimed. Russia is not conducting targeted strikes against educational facilities and have consistently been advocating ensuring comprehensive protection for minors and respecting the civilian nature of educational infrastructure. The armed forces of Russia, when conducting a special military operation, are strictly abiding by the IHL. Irrespective of the disinformation, deceitful and detestable campaign against Russia about supposedly 20,000 abducted Ukrainian children, even no one has been able to prove that. We are conducting work to reunite the minors with their families when they lost contact as a result of the conflict, and we're being assisted in this process by Qatar, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and the Vatican. Madam President, we highly value your personal efforts on this issue in the context of the situation surrounding Ukraine. We continue supporting constructive engagement through our Children's Ombudsman, and we count on further fruitful cooperation in this area. I thank you.